Okay, Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Chav Tes Yevamos 29. We're going to start on the bottom of Chav Ches Amabez at the Mishnah. That the Mishnah tells us Shloshach, and let's say you have three brothers. Shnayim Mehem Nisuin Shtei Achayos. Let's have these three brothers. Two of these three brothers were married to two sisters. O Isha Uvita, or one is married to a woman and her daughter. Oh, Isha Bat Bitar, one is married to a woman and her granddaughter via her son. Oh, Isha Bat Bina, and a woman and her granddaughter via her daughter, via her son. These two women who fall to Yibum with this third brother, they can only do chalitza because since they are related to each other and they have a zika with the same man, they are, let's say, in the case of the sister, achos sekukasa. And so therefore we don't allow them to do Yibum because they're quasi-related and we require chalitza because we're not sure if Zika is enough to completely terminate the relationship. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Poter, Rabbi Shimon exempts them from anything. The Gemara is going to explain why. If one of them was Isha Haisa Achas Mihan Asur Isur Erva, but let's say one of these two women, these two women who fall to him, if one of them was prohibited just by an erva relationship with him, meaning they're related to each other, but one of them is also related to the third brother, then Asur Bas, and since he's now able to do Yibum or Chalitza with her, he's going to be prohibited with her, and he's going to be permitted to marry the sister because since he's canceled out from this one who he has this erva relationship with, then the other one is not a zakuka to her, and so therefore he's going to be able to do Yibum or Chalitza with her. That's the position of Rabbi Shimon. Isur mitzvah, Isur kedusha. Let's say one of them was prohibited to him via Isur mitzvah, i.e., it was an erva relationship, but it was prohibited to him via Isur mitzvah rabbinically, or we say they're prohibited by Isur kedusha, it was a regular prohibition, but not kares. So then then they do Chalitza and not Yibum. Then they do just chalitza and not yibum, and we'll explain why. So says the Brayso, Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Poter b'shtein. If both of these women who are related fall to him in either yibum or chalitza, then Rabbi Shimon exempts Poter b'shtein. He exempts both of them from chalitza and from yibum. Why? Because it says v'ishal achosa lo tikach letzror. Because it says in the verse, ishal achosa lo tikach letzror. So therefore, since it says a woman is not a sister and a woman and her sister, you should not take litzror. Meaning to say, b'sha'ah shenasa tzorsu, at the moment where they fall and they both can be co-wives, i.e., both of them can be fall to the same brother through a zika. So then we say, even though they're not specifically co-wives, but they both have a zika, Rabbi Shimon says, don't marry. You can't marry either one, so you can't do yibum or chalitza with them. But if one of them, if one of them was prohibited by an isur of erva, by an erva prohibition, let's say one of them was his mother-in-law, for example, then you don't do yibum or chalitza with her because she's your relative, but you can marry the other one. You can do yibum or chalitza with the other one. So the Gemara says, well, hasu Emily, we already had this case at the beginning of our chapter. So it's already there. So why do we need to repeat it? So the Gemara explains, Rabbi Shimon, it's needed for Rabbi Shimon. Because you might have thought, Rabbi Shimon, since Rabbi Shimon taught that two sisters don't do chalitza or yibum. So if there are two sisters, then they wouldn't do chalitza or yibum. So therefore, we might have thought that since under this circumstance, since Rabbi Shimon says that if there are two sisters, you don't do chalitza or yibum, but in this case you can, because you're an erva with one of them, so you can do chalitza even with the other one. You might have thought you don't allow it here. Ligzor mishum beis achios to alma. That you might have thought that just like in general, you're not allowed to do it. So maybe in this case too, you shouldn't do it. Kamash one that Rabbi Shimon still allows it in this case. And if one of them was prohibited to you by an isur mitzvah, i.e., by rabbinic erva, then we say that you do chalitza or chalitza or yibum. So that's what it says. If there was Isur mitzvah, if one of them was prohibited by an Isur mitzvah, then or Isur kedusha, then both of them do chalitza or yibum. So the Gemara says, "Va'amar Rabbi Shimon," but didn't Rabbi Shimon say, "Shtei achios lo choltos v'amas yamos"? But didn't Rabbi Shimon say that you don't do when if it's two sisters, then you don't do chalitza or yibum. So how come here he requires chalitza? If it's two sisters, you don't who have a zika with you, you don't do chalitza or yibum. How come here he requires chalitza? Or he says you could do how come here requires chalitza and he doesn't allow yibum? I thought there's like two sisters falling to you. So why, if one of them is an erva, does he require a rabbinic erva? Does he require chalitza on both? So the Gemara says, well, the reason is because gezerah mishum isur mitzvah da'alma. Because in general, if you're going to say that these two sisters who fall to you and one of them is rabbinically prohibited, if you're going to say that they don't require any chalitza, you might think in general that a woman who falls to you in yibum, who's a rabbinic prohibition, also doesn't require any chalitza. But we know that that's not the case. We know she does. So therefore, we require here chalitza. So we don't say in general they don't. Mar says, well, okay, that makes sense with the woman who herself is rabbinically prohibited to you. But achosa ma'ikomer. But what about her sister? Her sister is not. You're not going to confuse in general. So Rabbi Shimon should exempt her in general from anything. Why does here he requires chalitza? Where it says gezerah achosa mishamwasa dida. No, we're going to make a decree here on the sister because of the one. Rashi says because of the mazel dida. Meaning to say the concept here is because if we're going to allow the sister without chalitza, then we might also have to come in and allow the one who is the erva also without chalitza. And then what we're going to do is we might in general end up letting all women who are rabbinically prohibited without chalitza. So it's basically we're worried what's going to happen if we allow it for her. Mar says, but if one of the sisters is an erva to you, then we don't require the other one, according to Rabbi Shimon, to have chalitza just in case. We don't require it there. So the Gemara says, well, shani erva. So no, by an erva, there the migmar gemirila inchi. Everybody knows that an erva is prohibited to you, and the sister, and therefore the sister would be permitted. So there, koa is like people know the law, and so therefore there's noise to it. Everybody knows it. You don't have to clarify. You're not worried about a decree. Okay, we're up to the next Mishnah, the Mishnah on the top of 29a. Again, these are very challenging dapim. We do the best we can. If you do it again, you'll understand it better. That's for sure. Of course, let's say we have a limited amount of time to dedicate to Torah every day. So you might think, but what do we get out of it? Sometimes it's so confusing. We're focusing ourselves on trying to improve our lives through Torah study. And just like our lives are not perfect, so too our Torah study is not perfect. But every day we try and we dedicate the time and we try and improve through our love of Hashem and our love of Torah. So it says in the next Mishnah, Shlosha Ach, and there are three brothers, Shnayim Nesuim Shtei Achayos. Of these three brothers, two of them are married to two sisters. Ve'echad Mufna. The third guy is unmarried, which in Yevamos is the safest place to be. So the third guy is unmarried. Meis Echad, but this third guy he's going to have a problem today. So what happens is, hold on one second. So hold on, I gotta stop my. So then what happens is Meis Echad Mibal Yachios, one of the husbands of these sisters died. So let's say the two sisters are Rachel and Leah, and the husbands are Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon are the husbands, and Levi is the bachelor. So Meis Echad Mibal Yachios. So let's say Reuven's wife Rachel died. Asaba Mufna. And then the bachelor did with her what's called Maimar. Maimar is this betrothal. Really, technically speaking, you have to do Yibum, but the rabbis instituted that rather than just physically consummate the relationship, first you do Mamar. But Mamar is a question: what is it? Is it a full marriage or not? So that's what he did here. He did Mamar. And then Shimon died. Shimon was his other brother. So now Leah falls to Yibum also before Levi. But Leah is the sister of Rachel, so now we have a problem. So, but Rachel didn't Maimer. So Beis Shammai Omrim Ishto Imo. Beis Shammai says Levi can remain married with Rachel. That's what he says. He remains with Rachel. V'alazu teitze mishamachos isha. But Leah would leave the relationship because she is the sister of his wife, and so therefore she goes out without any yibum or chalitza. Beis Hillel Motias Ishto beget. Beis Hillel says no, he has to divorce Leah because she has a zika with. Well, he has to divorce Rachel because she and Leah both have a zika with him. But he has to give her a get because if he did mamar, if he fully married this woman, you'd have to do a get. So since mamar may be effective, you give her a get. But you also do chalitza in case mamar is not effective. And also, since they're achos kukaso to him, you also have to do chalitza with Leah. Vizui Shamro, and Beis Hillel says this is what we say. Oy lo al ishto, woe to him for his wife, because now he has to divorce his wife. But he also can't be with his brother's wife. So therefore, he loses everything. That's what Beis Hillel says. Gemara says, Zuhi, when you say at the last line, this is what we say, Lamute Mai. So Gemara says this is referencing according to Rashi, a dispute later on in the tractate on Daf Kuftas. We're going to deal with it when we get to that, where Lamuti after Rabbi Yeshua, to exclude the position of Rabbi Yeshua, to lo Avdin and Kavase, o Ikar Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Lazar. So that's a case which Rashi tells us, similar case, but that's with the case having to do with Miyun, where the woman refuses, and that's going to be something that we get to on page 109. And so Ayin Shem, when we get to there, we'll deal with it in full. So now Rebbe Lazar comes along and tries to clarify what Beis Shammai says. Beis Shammai says that in this case, where the man did mamar, where Levi, the third brother, did mamar with Reuven's widow, and then Leah becomes false to Yibum. He says he stays with Reuven's widow Rachel, and Leah leaves without any Yibum or Chalitza because she's the sister of his wife. So Rebbe Lazar is going to analyze this position. So Rebbe Lazar says, "Lo tema, don't assume on the basis of what Rabbi Shimon said that Maimer Beis Shammai Kona. Don't assume on the basis of what Beis Shammai said that he remains with Rachel as though she's his wife. Don't assume that Beis Shammai therefore is of the position that if you do this mamar, this quasi kedushin, quasi betrothal after she falls to Yibam, don't assume that it's Kona Kinya Gamor. Don't assume that it's a full marriage." Don't assume that now they're fully married, and if he wants to divorce her from Maimer, that just like a regular get, like you do to divorce your regular wife, that's all that's required. But rather, what's needed is Maimer Beis Shammai Eno Kona. It doesn't mean to say if you want to divorce a woman from Maimer, you need get and chalitza. So, but what Rebbe Lazar says, according to Beis Shammai, what does Maimer do? Eno Kona el lidchos b'tzara b'chad. All it does, it's not a full marriage, but it does have one thing that's effective, meaning to say that it pushes off the sister, meaning to say that the sister is no longer able to say, you can't do Yibam with her. Because you started the Yibam, because Rachel started the Yibam process with Maimer, with Levi, now that Leah falls to Yibam, she can no longer push off Rachel, but Rachel is able to maintain this, and she's allowed to follow through and complete the Yibam. That's all Beis Shammai says, but they're still not fully married. So that's Rebbe Lazar's position. And so Rabbi Yavin comes along and says, you know what? I can prove to you that Rebbe Lazar is correct. I'll prove it to you. What's the proof? Because we learned Beis Shammai Omrim Yikaimu. And in a situation where there were two brothers married to two sisters, and there were four brothers, two brothers were married to two sisters, and they died. And so then there were two sisters who now fall to Yibam with two brothers. We had this at the beginning of our chapter. That under those circumstances, they're supposed to do chalitza, but if they went ahead and married each other, that Beis Shammai says they're allowed to remain. So we learn from there Yikaimu, meaning to say Yikaimu in lechatchila, that they can remain in that relationship, but ideally we don't want the two brothers to do Yibam with the two remaining sisters. And here's how Rabbi Yavin proves that Beis Shammai says it's not a full marriage, that Maimer is not a full marriage. We're in the top of 29b. And if you're going to be in the position that Maimer Beis Shammai Kona Kinyan Gamor, if you're going to be in the position that according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is completely effective at making a betrothal, so why don't we just say Zeyas and Maimer V'yik? Never Zeyas and Maimer V'yik. Now, why don't we just say that each one should just do Maimer? You're not going to be involved in a sexual relationship at that point, but when they do the Maimer, and they'll be his wife. There's no prohibition to do them. There's no prohibition in Maimer, and so then the other sister's connection will be uprooted. and so that she won't be achos the kukas. So when he can marry them. So from the fact that Beis Shammai doesn't say that, he only says if they did the yibum, it's okay. We see from here that so that proves that Maimer is not an effect. There's not a full betrothal. So the Gemara says, so no. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof because LMI, granted, it's not a complete kinyan, but you said that it pushes off the co-wife. So if that's the case, LMI, docha dechia gemura, well, even if you're going to be of the position that it pushes off the co-wife from stopping her from completing the yibum process, we can just say this law. Meaning, see, even according to what you say that it's not a complete marriage, still this would be an effective approach. Let them do maimer and thereby push off the other one from yibum. So therefore, so the Gemara says to Rabbi Avin, no, what do we say? When do we say that maimer is effective at pushing off the other one from blocking the yibum? We say that maimer that te'eri dachi, the isur lo dachi, if maimer is done in a permitted manner in a state where you can actually do yibum with the woman, then it's effective at blocking the other woman from blocking the yibum. But if maimer is done in a prohibited manner, meaning when you're not supposed to do the maimer, like in the case of the earlier case of the Mishnah where there were 4 brothers and 2 sisters who were married to 2 brothers and they died, where you're not supposed to do yibum there, then we're going to say it doesn't push it off. So too, that's what we're going to say here. According to the one who says, even according to the one who says that maimer is a complete kinyan, that's only maimer that teri kani. That's only if it was done in a permitted manner. But the isura, but if the maimer itself was prohibited, lo kani, it's not going to be it's not going to be effective at blocking it. Whereas Rav Ashi says, no, Rav Ashi had a different way of reading Rebbe Lazar's interpretation of Beis Shammai. Rav Ashi taught like this. Amar Rebbe Lazar said, Lo teima maimer Beis Shammai dachi dechia. Don't say a maimer Beis Shammai is dachi dechia gemura, v'tzarasa chalitza nami lobai. So when we said in our Mishnah that when Rachel felt a yibum with Levi and Levi did maimer, and then Leah, the sister of Rachel, then felt a yibum with Levi that she requires nothing. Actually, what Rebbe Lazar comes along and says, don't say that maimer to Beis Shammai completely pushes off the Leah in this case. Don't say that. Don't say that Leah wouldn't even require chalitza because she's the sister of the Zakuka. No, it pushes her off, meaning to say she can't block Rachel from getting married, from completing the yibum, but she still requires chalitza. Amar Rabbi Avin, Afana Nami Tanina. Indeed, Rabbi Avin says we actually learned this. Beis Shammai says in the case of the 4 brothers, which we just cited, Yekaimu, that if the 2 brothers did yibum, they can stay in the relationship. Doesn't that mean Yekaimu in lechavchilo? It doesn't mean that if they did it, they can maintain it, but ideally they shouldn't do the yibum. And if you're going to be in a position, Maimer Beis Shammai docha dechia gemura, if you're going to be in the position that Maimer, according to Beis Shammai, completely overrides it, why wouldn't we say Zayasa Maimer v'yitcha v'Zayasa Maimer v'yitcha? Why wouldn't we encourage them each to do Maimer and then they can maintain that relationship? So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, so how does Rebbe Lazar explain our Mishnah? So how do you explain our Mishnah where Beis Shammai says that that Levi would remain with Rachel in our scenario, and the other one goes free even without chalitza? Leah goes to the market even without chalitza. So how would you explain it? So this is a distinction. So the distinction is Yevama dechazil kulhu chazil mitzasa. A Yevama that when Rachel fell to Yibum, at that moment she was able to do everything. She was able to do completely yibum and completely chalitza. So therefore, when you do maimer with her, that pushes off the sister from blocking her. But Yevama lo chazil kulu lo chazil mitzasa. But if the Yevama was not able to do when she fell, she was not able to do when she fell to yibum, she was not able to do completely yibum and chalitza. Therefore, it's also the maimer is not going to be effective at blocking the sister from blocking her. So that it depends when you do the maimer. So this is To me, this reads a little bit like the other position, Maimar de Hetera, Maimar de Isura. Like it's not 100% clear from just the straight text of the Gemara what's the distinction between those two answers. It sounds like they're very similar. Hold on one second. Right. So the footnote here in the Mesivta Shas says that this really is the same distinction as Mamar de Teire Dachi and the Isur Dachi. However, Tosfos challenges that explanation because I just gave Rashi's explanation, and Tosfos says that they must be talking about a different distinction. According to Rashi, it's really basically the same answer. So the Gemara says, Ba'i Rava or Rabba, depending on the different Girsa. So Maimar or Beis Shammai. So according to Beis Shammai, who says that Maimar is so effective, and we're going to see that this is according to the position of Beis Shammai, that Maimar is really a Kona Kinyan Gamor. So according to that position of Beis Shammai, what does Maimar do? Does it do Nisuin Osa or Erusin Osa? We know that when it comes to marriage, in the Jewish marriage, there's two stages of marriage. There's Erusin, which is the betrothal engagement, which is a formal process, which requires a full get to terminate, or is it Nisuin, which is the complete marriage? So what does this Maimar do? So Amalei Abaye says, what are you asking this question about? If you want to say, we're asking whether or not you can inherit her, that the husband can inherit a woman who he does Maimar with. Well, and also you're asking what Tameh that can he become Tameh for her? To annul her vows. Hashte Rusa Ba'alma Tani Rebichia Ishto. If she would actually be fully betrothed, then about that, Rebichia says Ishto Arusa Lo Onein Vometamela, that a man who is just betrothed to this woman does not mourn for her, and V'chein Hilo and Enes Vometamislo, and also she does not basically mourn for him. Mesa, and if she dies, Eno Yorsha, he doesn't inherit her. Mace, who, and if he dies, Govek Suvasa, then she does collect ksuba. There is ksuba from Erison. But now, in all these cases where he doesn't act, or if she's fully betrothed, he doesn't act like her husband with respect to inheritance and mourning. Avaba Maimer Mibai. For sure, if he just does Maimer, which is rabbinic, for sure he's not going to be able to inherit her and mourn for her. So, and be obligated to mourn for her. So therefore, that's not the question. So the question is, El Inyan Misiro Chuppah Mai. No, we're talking about the case of Mesira Chuppah. What is Mesira Chuppah? Handing over to the Chuppah. That once she does, even though she's fully betrothed for Erison, she needs to go through the process of Nisuin to get fully married. So Erison is betrothal. So once she's Erison, the next stage in the process is canopy, meaning marital intimacy, living together. So in order to get to that, she has to willingly give herself over. So do we say that when you do Maimer, she now has to willingly decide to go to the chuppah? She has to agree to go to the chuppah, or do we say no, that she's fully married already, and therefore it's like he's fully married to her, and he can forcibly take her to consummate the marriage. Even though, by the way, this whole idea of forcing somebody we know is completely abhorrent to us today. That this was the question of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, that's the question. But do we say it's Nisuin, and therefore we don't have to forcibly consummate the marriage? Or maybe it's betrothal, and so therefore she has to agree by Mesira Chuppah. She has to agree to hand herself over to the Chuppah. Do we say it's Nisuin and she doesn't have to agree anymore, or it's Erison and she still has to agree? So the Gemara says, but this whole question is also ridiculous, because the whole concept of Yibum is that when she falls to Yibum, he could forcibly consummate the relationship. The brother could forcibly consummate because it's like they're married. So he says, that's what Gemara responds. If he had never done Maimer in the first place, it says about that, that the Yavam is allowed to forcibly consummate the relationship. Now that he did his quasi betrothal with her, Of course he could forcibly consummate. You want to say that now that he's done mimer, he can't forcibly consummate it, but before mimer he could? I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we're saying. Shani Omer, Kol Osa Mimer Bivamaso, whatever, because I could say once he does mimer, it's possible, Parcha Mimenu Zikas Yivamin, that the whole connection of the Yibum is different. Michol of Zikas Erison. Now he has a connection of Erison. And so it's different. And then therefore maybe he can no longer force her. It's a crazy assumption. But once you do something, even though it's more, you now change the legal status. So that's the concept. So the Gemara says, what's the law? Tashma, the Gemara answers, Shomeres Yavam, Ben Yavam Echad, Ben Shnei Yavamin. If you have Shomeres Yavam, so the Gemara wants to know what's the status in the end. Do we say that the mimer does Nisuin or Erison? So the Gemara says, well, let's talk about the following scenario. Let's say you have a woman who falls to Yibam, Shomeres Yavam, she falls to Yibam. Then we say, Bain Yavam Echad Bain Shnei Yavamin. If she falls to Yibam with one person or with two people. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, that Rabbi Eliezer says under those circumstances, Yefer, that they have the ability to annul the vows. Both of those men have the ability to annul the vows. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua says, Echad v'lo shneim. When do you have the ability to annul the vow of your Shomeres Yavam? If she falls to one brother, but not to two brothers, because two brothers, neither one really can be her husband, so therefore nobody has the ability to do it. And Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva says the Shomeres Yavam, the woman who is false to Yibam, but the Yibam is not done, never has the ability to annul the vows. The man never has the ability to annul her vows. Then we asked about this. Rabbi Akiva, I understand Rabbi Akiva's position is either the position in Zika. He says that there's no connection when you're a Shomeres Yavam, so therefore the husband cannot annul her vows because not her husband. In Zika fil achad. So even one person, even if she falls to Yibam, to one man, to one brother, he can't annul her vow. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua, who says that if she falls to Yibam with one brother, he can annul the vows because he says he says if she falls to Yibam with one brother, there's a Zika, he can annul the vows. Or Trey and Zika, but if she falls to Yibam with two, he cannot annul the vows. Ella Rabbi Eliezer, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, Nihinami to Kasaver Yesh Zika. Granted, Rabbi Eliezer says there is a Zika. Granted, Rabbi Eliezer says there's a Zika, but this is two brothers, Bishlam Ochad Mefer. But so I could understand. So Rabbi Eliezer says I can understand if she falls to one, you could annul the vow. I'll tray, but if she falls to two brothers, why are they able to annul the vows? Amai. So Amar Rabbi Ami. So what are we talking about? Why does Rabbi Eliezer say that if she falls to Yibam before two brothers, that they can annul the vows? Why? So Rabbi Ami says what we're talking about here is going to Ava Bei Maimer, that one of the brothers did Maimer with her. Ubei Shammai, and Bei Shammai says the Amar Maimer Kona Kinyan Gomer. So that she fell to Yibam before two brothers, and one of the brothers did Maimer, and that's why he can annul her vows. And it must be according to Beis Shammai, he says Maimer is effective. Now, if you say Maimer makes it like a full marriage, therefore Mishum Hachi Mefer, that's why he can annul the vows. Eli Amr say Rusin say, but if you say Maimer does just a Rusin, it's just a betrothal, Hechi Matzi Mefer. If you're from a betrothal, you can't annul the vow. If a woman is betrothed, then you require the husband and the engaged fiance to annul the vows. So from the fact that Rabbi Eliezer is saying that if a woman falls to Yavim before two people, he can annul the vow, and we're talking about the one who did the mimer can annul the vow, must be that mimer doesn't assuin. So Amar Nachman is like, no, my Mefer B'shutfas. Here too, when it says he can annul the vow, it means in partnership he can annul the vows. Who are Rabbi Eliezer, and it goes according to the position of Rabbi Eliezer. It says Maimer Beis Shammai Eno Koneh El Widchos Litzar Bolvad. So he says that Maimer only works to push off the Koai from stopping your Yibum. And so therefore my Mefer, so why is he able to annul it? But B'shutfas. So it means he can annul it if there's a partnership with the husband, with the fiance and the father. So Amar Chal Rabbi Eliezer, Imar Amri Ana. Maybe I say Eno Kona Elet Chos B'Tzara Bavad. I say it only works to block the Koai from stopping the Yibum. But Dulo Sagila. So Imar Amri that it's not going to be sufficient to give her a get, meaning to say that when I say it pushes off, but when he says, so Rabbi Eliezer says, I would say as follows: Imar de Amriana, that which I say that the mimer does not effectively kona unless to push off the except to push off the tzara. That just means no sagi labaget. Nami chalitza, but she also requires chalitza. But hafer nidareh mi amrinan. Did I say that the mimer is not kona to annul or vow? I didn't say that. So a mimer would work perhaps to annul or vow, or ibayis ema, or alternatively, how would we explain the position of Rabbi Elazar that Amrachal Rabbi Elazar says, well, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who says that Maimer is an effective kinyan, but that it does a rusin minicha, it's also not good. Mikatani Yafer, who doesn't say that they should annul the vows. It says Yafer, he annuls the vows. Yafer Katani. So this is what our Mishnah is talking about. Sha'amda Badin, that she took her brother-in-law to court and said, you have to either do Yibam or Chalitza, and he isn't doing either one. And so therefore, Pasku La Mizonos, they say you have to support her. Mishalo, and you have to support him from your brother's property. Rav Pinchas Mishmei de Rabba, Rav Pinchas Mishmei de Rabba, Kol Ano Deres Al Das Bala No Deres. So since she's being supported, therefore the vow is done on the basis of her husband, who has the ability, or the brother who's supporting her, and therefore he has the ability to annul the vow. So it's not even if mimer is not effective. That's the story. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them. Any questions?